That's my question. Yes.
Good evening. It's May 13th at 5 o'clock, and we're going to shortly convene the special meeting of the Gates Mills Council. Before that, however, Council Member Steinbrink would like to make a few comments in respect of the Euclid officer who was killed in the line of duty. Greg?
Yeah, so before we get started, I'd just like to ask for a moment of silence for Euclid Police Officer Jacob Durbin, who was tragically killed on line of duty early Sunday morning. A mother lost her son on Mother's Day. Officer Durbin had been with the force 9 months, tragically taken too soon, and was due to be married this summer. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd also just add, I talked to the chief about this, and I believe Officer Durbin's father and uncle are both on the Euclid Police Force as well. And our participation in the regional VEG unit was helpful in monitoring and flying the drones over the complex in Shaker Heights where he was identified and found. So it's great to have the regional talent, frankly, put together to help in situations like this. Okay, may I ask for a roll call, please, clerk?
Anton. Deegan.
Present.
Press.
Yes.
Steinberg.
Here.
Turner. Yes. Welch.
Yes.
Councilmember Boone is not here, but I think we do accept him.
Let's wait a few minutes before we ask for his excuse his presence, okay? I think he may just be running a little late. We're here at 5:30 rather than 5:30. We're here at 5 rather than 5:30.
I have a question on that item. This is a workshop, not a council meeting. I would not expect that we take a vote to excuse someone or any other vote, not necessary.
Oh, that's a good point.
Well, that's probably right.
Okay, well, let's proceed then. So we've gathered today to discuss some of the significant initiatives coming out of the planning process that were started in the village about 2 years ago. You'll recall that at the March meeting, I had taken the 60 some odd pages and 21 objectives and 100 recommendations and separated them into operational and strategic areas of importance. Council at that meeting discussed the spreadsheet that identified the matters of strategic importance to 3.5 main areas. And the largest and top priority of those three was environmental matters, and essentially appreciating and preserving and respecting and enhancing the natural and scenic beauty that we have here in the village. We also suggested work steps that council saw for the first time that day. And I think coming out of that meeting, there was a consensus that those were meaningful work steps to go forward with, and that we would then take those and meet again in a council workshop. The purpose of a workshop is a working session. There will be no ordinances today, no legislation or no votes. This is a chance for council among themselves with the audience to discuss items that were in the planning process and the items that are in the environmental document that's in front of them. We also want to make sure that the audience has a chance to participate at the right time. It's not a traditional town hall, but I think as we go through the 2 hours that we've set aside, there will be significant conversation and substantial enough time for audiences to participate if they have questions or want to comment. That was an important matter in putting together the timing of this. So what we've done since the March meeting is we've taken the items that are on the top of the spreadsheet that say protect, preserve, and enhance the natural and scenic environment. Those are verbatim what was presented in the past. And I suggested 5 paths forward, which are listed on the right-hand side of the top. Create the Village Natural and Scenic Environmental Committee, focusing on land, waterways, and wildlife. Number 2, leverage experts and organizations that we have contact with. Number 3, formalize the role of the Land Conservancy with respect to the tree plan and the tree canopy. Number 4, have the administration evaluate and enforce environmental codes that exist and perhaps additional codes. And number 5, evaluate the role of the Architectural Review Board and Historical Subcommittee. They may have a role in our environmental ordinances and our environmental committees. We've taken all that and put it together in the following structure that I'd like to walk through with council and then take comments after I walk through it, if that's okay. I think this is an item that can distinguish and differentiate Gates Mills from a lot of other communities. There was clear consensus among the survey results, the workshops, the town halls, that people come here, stay here, live here, desire to be here, visit here because of the scenic and natural environment that we have. Whether it's the scenic drives up and down River Road and down certain roads and the stone fences and pastured lands, the clean water, the bridges, the town atmosphere, the wildlife. I understand we now have a mink in our pond, in our yard. Little devil goes down there and eats the koi. It's going to be a tough year for the koi this year. But it's amazing the kind of wildlife that we seem to have in the village. We put all this together into what I'll call the Natural and Scenic Environmental Committee, and I can envision that having the primary mission of preserving, protecting, and enhancing the natural and the scenic environment of the Chagrin River Valley in which we are located with respect to water, wildlife, and land. And the responsibilities would be listed there as 6 items. 1 would be to set, review, and approve the activities and the actions of 3 subcommittees that I'm recommending. 2 is to be the official body that oversees all village-owned land. As we've gone through the process, we understand that the Metro Parks, the village, the Land Conservancy, and then lastly, the residents are really the 4 largest chunks of landowners in the village. And we have a significant amount of acreage that the village owns that should also be subject to the same environmental review and the same tree plan, et cetera. And 3, collaborate with the major constituents that would make this plan viable. That is the residents, 900 some homes, the Land Conservancy, which while independent in many respects is and can be influenced by the village through the levy proceeds and to its 5 of 15 members. The Metro Parks, which is probably the largest land owner in the village. Other Gates Mills Village organizations that want to participate in land and conservation and environmental matters. Our neighboring communities, and we can't forget the governmental authorities who watch over the lands and the waters. Right now, that is a little unorganized. It's done by the village. Some of it is done by committee. Some is done by department heads. I'd like to organize that collaboration to fall under the environmental committee. Another responsibility would be for recommending the uses of the village conservation levy. We've had the debate on that 2 years ago. The levy's been passed again by a 3-to-1 margin. The funds are being stewarded and watched. But I think having an environmental committee being the authority to recommend to council how those proceeds are spent, whether it's for education or tree canopy work or land acquisition or whatever, it'd be good to have that recommendation coming from a body, and I see that on the Environmental Committee. Number 5 would be to develop a strong working relationship with the Land Conservancy. And finally, under the Environmental Committee, regulations to protect the scenic corridors and views. There was an item in the plan that was listed and I won't say seemed to come late in the game and really maybe wasn't as well developed as can be. And so, we need to have somebody look at the environmental the scenic corridors and views that we have and see whether an ordinance or some regulation should be put in place to manage those. I can see kind of 3 subcommittees. If you'll bear with me another 5 minutes. For those folks that just entered, there's a sheet in the back, which is what council is looking at. It's on the right-hand side there, ma'am. Thank you, Chuck or Jerry. So it seemed logical to have 3 committees, one dealing with the tree canopy or tree and the tree plan. This I can see as having primary responsibility for, first of all, promoting tree health education to all the residents. The residents individually own more land than the 3 bodies I mentioned earlier. And it's important to educate the residents on what trees are and what healthy trees are. And that's a big part of what I think this committee could do. And it's a part of what our levy conservancy fund allows us to do. Secondly, developing and approving a tree plan for 2 things primarily. One is the village-owned properties. And secondly, and subject to the Land Conservancy's approval as to their land, a tree plan for its owned or restricted lands. I think we also want the tree committee to collaborate with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Holden Arboretum, and other organizations that have an interest in the tree canopy space. We're fortunate in the county. I think we're number 2 in terms of tree canopy at 80 some odd %. So we're in a really helpful and healthy situation, but we also want to do what we can to make sure that the canopy is healthy by over time eliminating dead or invasive species and replanting with healthy ones. There's a lot that have already been done on tree health. I don't think the village itself needs to recreate the wheel. I think we have a lot of that skill and talent already vested somewhat in the Land Conservancy and other organizations like Holden Arboretum. I'd like the committee also to oversee the execution of the tree plan once it's put together with respect to how quick, how it's done, what the expenditures are, what the needs are with respect to both the village property and the Conservancy property. The village won't be able to help the Conservancy with its property. We're not going to go on private property and cut trees and do things like that, but we certainly can help with the tree plan, and working with them, we can work to make sure that the village's owned trees and properties are in good shape. And finally, overview the various ordinances that we already have on the books, see whether they are current, and if they are, let's have a report back that they've been reviewed and they're current. And as we talked about during the plan and during the planning process, we need stronger enforcement on some of these ordinances. The 2 that I'd ask this committee to look at would be the tree cutting ordinance and the protected hillside ordinance. I also foresee the need for a waterways committee. The primary responsibility is to promote all the clean water initiatives that are going on. A lot of that is a collaborative effort with 4 or 5 partners that are listed. The Chagrin River Watershed Partners is probably the lead on the river and the cleanliness of the river, what goes into it. We are members of that organization. We have 2 people on the board of that organization. We probably need to hear a little more formally on what they're doing and how we participate in that. The Cuyahoga County Soil and Water Conservation District is another important body. By its name, you can tell what they do. The County Board of Health is important because septic systems have their discharge eventually into the river. And the Ohio EPA, which again, as a regulatory authority, has primary responsibility for pollution control on the river. In respect of the ordinances that are on the books, we have already the stormwater ordinances and the riparian setback ordinances that were adopted a few years ago. Those are relatively new and presumably those are in good shape. But I asked this subcommittee as well to take a look at those ordinances, compare them to best practices and come back with any modifications that they'd like to recommend. Once updated and evaluated, we'll be able to enforce them with the confidence that these are best practices and these are relevant for the current environment. And finally, a wildlife subcommittee, maybe 5 members there, responsibilities to promote the wildlife programs and initiatives in the village, such as the bird sanctuary designation, the bees, the butterflies with the pollinators and the milkweed. It's a lot of wildlife that I won't say take for granted, but lives here and relies on us. And it'd be nice to have a subcommittee group watch over those initiatives and those actions. There's other organizations within the village that have similar interest in this. I picked the Garden Club as an example. We should be able to collaborate with them on plantings. Again, milkweed and pollinators is an example. They've taken a very active involvement over prior years in helping with the health of the Arboretum. And there's other institutions like that that have had an interest in the environment. And then finally, we do have an exterior lighting ordinance. I'd like that to be freshened up and taken a look at. That's relatively new. And there were possibilities for both dark skies and blue sky ordinances or regulations that were brought up either in the plan or through residents writing to me about that. So I could see this as being a very significant committee with respect to the village and the village's future. Its goal to be a leader in those things that are green, to be a place where people desire to want to come to and stay at, whether it's for a day's visit or for a lifetime. And I think some organization like this, focused in 3 groups: trees, water, wildlife, under the auspices of an environmental committee, is a suggested way to go. I will say that council has wanted to discuss this for a while. So while I have some pride in what we put together here, I am completely open to other ideas, suggestions, red lines, and other ways of looking at this. But this seems to be a way to at least start the discussion. Okay. Thank you for those few minutes for letting me overview this. I'm going to ask, if I can, Sandra, and David, who have been kind of working a little bit on the tree canopy piece since January, with me, to maybe be the first of the council members to comment if they'd be willing to do that.
You go first.
Thank you.
You go first.
Thank you. So in January, the mayor, Nat Smith from the Land Conservancy, David and I, Mitch Bass, met with 2 individuals from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources to kind of start talking about the issue of managing the tree canopy. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources does have a lot of services that they make available and consultation to help both municipalities as well as individual residents. And one of the individuals who met on that committee met at that meeting, Mitch Bass, has done a lot of work already on his property utilizing the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. So in a sense, this committee has gotten a little bit of a head start. We talked about membership, and the individuals from the Land Conservancy were going to be Mitch Bass and Nat Smith. There were 2 individuals from the community, Eric Carlson and Holly Matthews, who we as a group thought would be good members for the as residents. And then our own Ted Zalewski on staff is actually an arborist. So he would be very important, I think, to that. That committee. And the things that Steve put down here in terms of responsibilities, are things that we discussed. The only addition I guess I would make was that we also were going to apply for for the village to become a tree city. Again, I think what you've done here nicely outlines what we talked about. And I know individuals are excited about this and about getting started. I think what's significant is that it's a collaboration between the Land Conservancy, the village, and some individual residents, and then utilizing Holden and Metro Parks and all those other entities. So David, what did I leave out?
Thanks for this, Steve. Thanks for this. The structure is perfect. How it operates is the question. And I think it's clear to me that you're suggesting that the Natural and Scenic Environmental Committee would actually be accountable for this program. Council would be, obviously, but this environmental committee, he will be approving all actions of subcommittees. Is that true, or that's a question? Yeah. Well, I think that's very important, and we shouldn't waver from that.
You support that then?
I do, very much so.
And that was number one, that the actions and their activities are
I want
approved.
to emphasize that.
Right, thank you.
And I think the fact that it retains responsibility for allocating the use of the conservation levy proceeds, that's very important too. 100%.
Good.
Other than that, the only thing that's missing from this list of potential partners are private companies that I know would love to help us in this program one way or another. And we shouldn't forget that they're out there and they know a lot more about this sort of stuff than we do. And they know how to do it, and they know how to do it in a commercially sensible way. So other than that, I don't have much to add. I think this is a very good first cut, Steve. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the compliments. I'll share them with the staff. Janet and Dave Biggert and Ted and a few others helped us put this together. So thank you for that. Yeah, there are people that can help us a lot. Some commercial like Davy Tree, as you know, has offered to put together tree plants, et cetera, for fees. That may be a way to go. It may be the way that we ask them to do that pro bono as a way to understand what their capabilities are. We may pick a project or two across the village to see how that would work. Perhaps it's the Arboretum, perhaps it's the Field area, or something, some other area where it's the village property, so we can move at our speed and control it and see how this all works. But I'd like to get this going this summer, because if there are trees that would need to be pruned or cut, it's probably September, October during that type of season, and that's. Well, it seems we're only here in May, September and October are 3 or 4 months away. So Sandra mentioned some of the committee members. What I've given to each of the council people is a blank sheet of paper too. Well, it's not completely blank, but it has each of the committees and the subcommittees listed. And if they have individual suggestions for people that they think should be on these committees, please fill them out and send them back to me or drop it off in the village hall. And then we'll call them and vet their interest and capabilities and so on, and be able to come back to council with the compilation of those names. This would be like any other set of committees or subcommittees. These would be mayoral appointments subject to council approval. So your input now would be helpful as we put together these committees. So thank you.
One thought on that, general observation. I think it would be very good to get very young people on some of these committees. Kids that's still at school, perhaps, the ones who will be living in this village when we're long gone. And I think in schools these days, there's a lot of teaching going on about this very subject. And it would be foolish to miss their attitude and their knowledge. The other thing I think is very important in this is a tree doesn't care who owns it. A new tree doesn't care who plants it, as long as somebody's taking care of it. And they don't care who takes care of it as long as they do. So I think drawing lines in this exercise is going to be tempting, geographic lines. But I think we should try to rise above all that if we possibly can. There are clearly constraints, but a tree needs to be taken care of and a young tree needs to be nurtured. And we must make sure that we don't lose that overall attitude.
That's a good point, and it's kind of why we want the tree plan for the village and for the valley, irrespective of whose land. Well, we're not going to do the Metro Parks because we don't have the right to go there and tell them what to do. No, we can liaise with them and understand what their plans are. But I see the other three, the village and the conservancy, literally working hand in hand to create a tree plan and helping the villagers who
Yeah.
have properties that want to make sure they have healthy trees and that the dead or dying trees are addressed and handled.
Yep.
So 3 out of those 4 should be at least under kind of one combined plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
In terms of the students, interesting, we talked about last meeting, the bike path, and one of the individuals that wrote back to me after the last meeting was a 13-year-old boy who heard that we didn't approve the bike path, and he wanted to know why that was. And we have a lot of people interested in biking, including himself, and we have money, and we're out here and there's no cars, and so why can't we have bike paths? So those 13-year-olds have a voice too. Well,
Yep.
you can't forget them.
And their voice will grow with time.
I think, David, in terms of your comments, we're trying to keep these committees to 5 and 7 members just so we can kind of enact them and get things done. A group like that might be invited to participate or to listen, to advise or whatever, but I think in terms of voting members to
No.
evaluate action, we probably want to keep something like I've got suggested here.
That applies to lots of villagers too. They won't want to be on the committee, but they'd like to be involved.
Yeah, thank you. Michael?
I certainly agree that we ought to have a tree plan that doesn't consider boundaries. And certainly some of the trees the recommendation will be to go on private property in some cases. And the owners may or may not cooperate, but at least we ought to start out with putting the trees where they do the most good.
Okay.
But I did have a question, Steve, and I did have an observation. The question is on soil erosion. I've heard a lot of complaints about that while I've been on council. It's up there in the priorities, but it's not assigned to any particular committee. Which subcommittee or committee handles soil erosion?
I thought that fell under the protected hillside ordinances, which is listed here under the tree committee number 5.
Okay, great. As long as it's got a home, I just think it should have a home. The other one is an observation. I learned the other day that Hunting Valley took on the Dark Skies initiative and got quite excited about it, but then they backed off for some reason. I don't know what the reason is, but it was full speed ahead and then dead stop. So we probably ought to contact them and find out. We'll
Okay.
probably learn something from that contact.
Okay, I think the dark skies and the lighting ordinances are of the same vein. It may be that they wanted to perhaps correlate the two. But just a guess. David, you had a comment?
Yeah, I've forgotten what the heck it was. Mustn't have been very good.
It'll be back.
If it comes back, I will ask to
Yeah.
talk.
Yes, Lori.
So a couple things. One, just as an aside on the erosion thing, I think it goes beyond trees. So you might want to consider broadening that, but your call. So to follow on a little bit, what David said, it kind of triggered a thought about the schools. The schools aren't listed as stakeholders here, and it seems like we have 3 schools with several of which have pretty large properties. So might want to include them. And then we might want to consider an intern. There's a lot of people in grad school pursuing environmental studies and so on. Intern might help you kind of project manage some of this stuff. So might, be something you could consider.
Great. Those are great suggestions. Janet and I talked about that today. If we go, well, not with the interns, but we were just talking about the load that this will bring onto somebody and somewhere and where that falls. And so that's a good suggestion. Thank you. And we'll look at the schools. Thanks for that suggestion.
Yeah, the other, Steve, the other thing too about this is it's going to require a lot of communication with the, with the village, with villagers, just to let everybody know what's going on and kind of keep them up to speed. And with the comprehensive plan, we had a communications committee. So I don't know if you wanted to add that or again, have a villager who's interested or a couple of them to help out with that or to
Okay.
head that.
Thank you.
My thought came back. I would ask that as we enter into this very ambitious program, I see it being very ambitious, that we try whenever possible to use facts and science as the guiding principles. Everybody has views on the environment, some more parochial than others, but everybody has a point of view. If you ask a question, they'll give you an answer. How well informed or not, I don't know. So I think data and science must be take us as far as they can. And then I'm more than happy when that's done, that judgment and bias take over. But the data is out there. There's so much knowledge in this area, not about us, but about the science of this protecting the environment. And I think we've got to pay a lot of attention to that. We can't plod on with opinions.
And I think that's important. And we probably as a council or as a committee here will have to sift through that science because there's so many different opinions too, even among scientists as to what the priorities are and what the solutions are. It is really complex.
Some science is established, some isn't. We've got to learn to differentiate.
Well, those are great comments because there is a lot here. And I think what's happened is the villages receives some of these materials and someone, perhaps the mayor, maybe the service director, maybe someone in the clerk's office would read something, but it's never evaluated in terms of, is that significant to what we're doing and does someone else know that? So the way we've broken these down and the need to, really be in contact with the watershed, in the soil conservation district and of course the Land Conservancy, Holden Arboretum, there's just a lot of organizations to stay in touch with, understand what they're doing. So I think having some structure like this where those are assigned to specific individuals and committees should help with that understanding and then dissemination. So thank you. Craig.
A couple of thoughts. First of all, I think this is well done. I like the structure. I think it's well thought out. I think it's specific enough that I think it helps drive and encourage those residents that are interested to volunteer. I always worry sometimes that some of the subcommittees that we have, that's insurance or budget, and you kind of scratch your head and say, well, what type of insurance is that? What type of work would I be doing? And so I think as a framework, I really like the way this is laid out. And I think those that want to get involved will know ahead of time what they're getting into. Just a couple of observations. I don't know what kind of overlap there is with existing committees that we have, that maybe some of this work is currently being done by others and those committees go away and this is a new framework, which I certainly would be in favor of. The Western Reserve Land Conservancy is notably missing from this as a partner. And I would strongly suggest that we talk with them. I think they have done a fantastic job with some of the properties. If you look at the old Shiverick property in terms of generating funds, putting restrictions on property, but also selling that property to generate revenue so that it's not always money going out the door. They've kind of figured out a way to put easements on properties, but then turn around and sell them to environmentally conscious individuals who don't mind the fact that they bought a 20 or 30 acre piece of land that cannot be subdivided. And then the last two things, I don't know that I agree with ceding control of the Land Conservancy funds to an appointed committee. I view council as a check and balance on the Land Conservancy. So we've got elected officials, not appointed officials. That is, to me, is always a check and balance on what the Land Conservancy is doing, that ultimately it's taxpayer money that's going to fund the Land Conservancy. And so that all comes back to 7 or 8 individuals that were elected to do the business of the village, not appointed by a committee.
On that point, I tried to do that. Maybe I didn't get the right wording, but it says responsible for recommending the use of the levy proceeds.
Exactly.
So that essentially was recommending to council. We could be clear on that though.
And then the other thing is making sure that we balance, and I'll just use the term, big government versus property rights. And so I think at one end of the spectrum, you've got a township where pretty much do whatever you want. And the other end of the spectrum is a place like Cleveland Heights or Shaker Heights, where there's a lot of restrictions around how high your mailbox can be and what color the siding can be. And so all these ordinances that ultimately make it difficult for people that want to buy a house here or move here to do anything with their property. So I just, and I'm glad that residents are involved because they'll have some input on all of that, but I just want to make sure that we're mindful of the fact that, you know, we've got individuals with their personal property rights. And we're trying to do some things that we think will make the village be better. And I think to Sandra's point, I think the education and the communication is a big lift and a big part of all of this. But great job.
Good point. And just to follow on, Craig, your comment, Steve, on that item, number 4, under the Natural and Scenic Environmental Committee responsible for recommending uses of the village conservation levy, you're talking about the village monies, not the land conservancy monies. Okay. Just want to make that clear.
Well, what's the difference? I mean, the difference is that the Land Conservancy raises its own money, right? And then they receive levy proceeds from the village. I'm talking about the money which the village controls, and we control the entire conservation levy. It comes to us. We have an agreement.
Yeah, yes, we control it, but for the next 3 years, we have an agreement on how it will be used.
This is a 50-year plan. This is a.
Yeah.
Right.
As to this, though, this is meant to suggest that the village's 50%, our $100 and some $1,000 per year, that the environmental committee would be recommending to council how that 100,000 is used, because the other 100,000 going to Land Conservancy is already contractually required to go there, and it's their responsibility to use that according to the agreement and the levy.
Well, if that's up for debate, I would debate it.
I don't think that's up.
Not
for
here
debate.
necessarily, but at some point.
Okay, I guess
We
that can
can-
be done after the 5-year levy, if, with
Yeah,
a renewed
Well, that's gonna be
agreement.
sooner than you think.
Right.
We better be ready for that.
Okay, but just to be clear now, because
Right.
I wouldn't want any misconception that
No, I think we've had enough within the village here to
Entire-
talk about should this be for,
land conservancy.
for the Mayfield Road culvert repair, which is a stormwater management activity? Should it be for land acquisition? Should it be for education? There's a lot of things that we could use it for. So this is meant to be a body that would weigh those and recommend to council how the village's portion should be used. Lori?
You haven't. Oh, okay. Oh, I was just going to ask 2 things. One is, so is the idea then the Natural and Scenic Environmental Committee then what reports back to council as to their findings on a periodic basis?
Yes, just as
Okay.
would other committees.
Okay, and then the oversee all village-owned land. So to Craig's point about, is there overlap? That's currently being done by the village per se, correct?
It's going to be done by the village, but I've talked to our real estate committee, and we'd like to do this year, it was started maybe right around COVID, is to have a better inventory of not just the land that we own, but what is it about the land that we should know? For example, are there easements on the land? Have we granted easements? Are there oil wells and gas wells on the land? There's not a complete current inventory of the village-owned land
More of an.
with that level of detail that, and this would be a committee that could watch over that.
I think, Laurie, taking it a step further, I think to the extent we control village land as a council, we influence Land Conservancy land via our relationship with the Land Conservancy. I think for every piece of land that each of us own, there should be a specific plan for that piece of land. What are we going to do with it? If we just let it sit there, is that the best we can do? And I think the Land Conservancy, I'm told, has individual plans for their individual properties. I haven't seen them, but if they exist, they exist. That would be interesting to see. And we need the same for the village. And I think the real estate committee has only ever seen its responsibility as buildings. I don't think they've ever seen their responsibility extending towards land that is conserved or vacant?
During my time on council, I'd say income producing assets, yes. So the
Yeah.
village owned buildings in the town center.
Renting out.
That's been the
property
focus,
largely
yeah.
and maintaining it. But the land that isn't used, for example, the teardrop up at the northeast end of Gates Mills Boulevard. I've never heard the real estate committee talk about that, yet it's the biggest single piece of land the village owns.
So this suggested structure would give responsibility to the environmental committee
Exactly.
to do that
Yes,
in item 2.
yes.
Well, I mean, David, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, responsible for recommending use of the village conservation levy. I mean, prior to the most recent levy, there really was hardly any village conservation levy money left to the village. Because
That's
the
true.
split was
That's true.
50. And so this is really the first time where that money's been there, and there are some, I mean, via the language of the levy itself, there's some it's supposed to be used for conservation purposes.
Correct.
So, so I think the committee can explore possible uses, because I know there's been some conversation over, well, is this an appropriate use for that money? Does it fit within the language of the levy?
Yep.
So, you know, as far as the use of the properties, I mean, first of all, on some of the village properties, I think as Steve was saying, you know, are there easements on it? Are there, I mean, sometimes as we see a lot in planning and zoning, sometimes the boundaries on these properties aren't even really clear, or there's, and so, I mean, there's a lot of work sometimes to be done to figure out, okay, village owns this piece of property. Can you do something with it, even if you wanted to do something with it? Because we have to make sure exactly what the legal status of the boundaries are, whether anyone's got a prescriptive easement on it, or things like that, of that nature. I mean, I think there is plenty to do there. You know, whether the conservancy should have specific plans for any of its property. I mean, in order to maintain its charitable status, it has to use the lands for, I mean, they have to be purchased or preserved for a conservation purpose. I mean, it's not,
Understood.
yeah, the Land Conservancy is not a development arm. It is a conservation purpose. Now, whether there's some minor use of the properties that could be made, that's up for
That's
some.
not what I was suggesting. What I was suggesting is that for each plot of land that the Land Conservancy controls, they have a plan for the environmental protection of that
Okay.
property. We can't just let things sit there. If we let them sit, they'll die away. I'm convinced of that. So we've got to have a proactive plan that takes every property forward within whatever constraints it might have through ownership or whatever else. So it's a very this is a big project. And I think for us to take shortcuts or to make assumptions early on would be counterproductive.
All right, because you're following with Craig mentioning Western Reserve Land Conservancy. Western Reserve Land Conservancy is a little more
Commercial.
commercial. It's a little more.
Say more,
It's a little
I would say
more-
more institutional.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
a little more.
Not a voluntary
Well, I'm not saying we
organization.
should mimic them. I'm just saying there's somebody we should talk to. They know a lot.
Yeah, that was my point.
Yeah.
And that, you know, along with, there has to be
They
money
will
to,
sometimes
right.
look at trading or selling properties, and I know the Gates Mills Land Conservancy has been, you know, we're not interested in trading or selling or.
Well, you did once, but not recently.
Scott's got a good point. I mean, in the past, all the levy money has gone to the Conservancy, and they've done a good job with it. Now we've taken half and kept it for the village. And it's not enough to just say we can't spend that money on this particular project. We need to proactively come up with some plan to spend that money, and it better be a good one. If it's not, we should give the money back to the Conservancy.
I think we're talking here about facing a situation where we're going to have a lot of trade-offs. We're going to have to decide, is spending $250,000 on a plot of land to preserve it better than spending $250,000 on planting trees somewhere else. I don't know how we're going to do that, but that's what we have to do. There will be trade-offs. And therefore, I think that the money should follow the strategy. The money should not drive the strategy.
I agree with that.
Right.
But whoever's, if the Conservancy has a better idea of how to spend the money that belongs to the
Absolutely.
village,
Absolutely.
I'm all for letting them have it.
And vice
and letting them
versa.
Spend it.
And vice
Well,
versa.
I don't think we can take back the money we've already given them.
No, I'm talking about beyond the 3 years.
Beyond, yeah, well, at the end of, yeah, we're halfway through the 5-year period now. And I've been on council most of the entire time, and we haven't ever talked about how to spend the levy money that we have.
It's in the bank.
It's in the bank. But there
We're
hasn't even
earning
been
4%.
discussion on how to spend
Right.
it.
Well, we haven't spent it because we haven't had a plan on what to do with it. And this is the start of putting together those plans, whether it's a tree plan, whether it's a education plan, whether it's a stormwater plan, whatever it is.
Exactly.
Exactly.
6 months into this, we should have a plan. And you're right, David, there'll be choices to be made between where we spend that money.
Prioritization across the entire spectrum.
Ed, did you have any comments?
Yes, I see David has a very good point here, that we get private vendors involved here. Because we have all these beautiful plans, but we have no way to implement them as far as I can see. For example, Epping Road. You'll notice the beautiful trees all the way up and down Epping Road. And then we as a family just went ahead and planted trees, a few years back just to grow in where the other trees died. Well, they didn't die. So here we got these beautiful big trees and little trees all smushed in together. So we started cutting some of those down, and the consumer advocate movement was crazy. I mean, people just don't touch those gorgeous trees. We've got a tree canopy. So what do you do? But we have no vendor person that they can come to, to the Improvement Society and to say, we have a plan. How do we get it to work? We're just coming out of major damage from this winter. And just my own personal feeling, we calling tree companies to come and just fix things because neighbors are saying it's going to fall on my wires. The tree companies won't touch it. So, we're seeing CEI involved. But what we really need is something the village would have a support group that could implement. And whether it's private land, you pay for it, but it's somebody that can go to your committee, get approval for it, get all the blessings we need, and then go ahead and implement some of these beautiful plans and put some teeth into some of these laws. Otherwise, we just sit here and talk about them and nothing happens. So that's my personal feeling. For another example, the dam fell down. A lot of people want to replace that dam. I mean, nobody gives a damn. So, these are type of the projects that, we could implement and people could donate to, and we could put some teeth in some of these beauty things that we wanted to do here, because there's a lot we can do. The village is gorgeous and preserve a lot, and, fix some of our problems we have right now, because everybody's running out of electricity. So, and get somebody in there to do it. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Let's take a break for a second and see if there's any comments from the audience. Yes. We'd ask anyone that speaks to just identify yourself and not your home address as to privacy.
Okay,
Just let us know if you're a resident or not. And
I am a resident. My name's Barb Summer. And I really am encouraged to see all of this work that you've done. I have a couple of questions. As far as selecting committee members, has that been put out to the community to solicit input on who should be on the committees, or?
it will be after this. I wanted to have council react to the structure that I recommended. And I think there's a pretty good support for the structure. So we'll go out probably in the next pink sheet or on Gates Mills Connect and ask for volunteers if they have an interest or a particular passion or skill to send us their name.
Okay, I was just wondering, because it sounds like the tree committee's already.
Well, we put
established.
that together a little early, just we had ODNR attention and some other attention, and we knew we wanted to do something with it. So that was started earlier for that reason.
Okay, the other thing I wanted to mention is I've been the last couple of years spending a lot of time learning about watershed stewardship and related wildlife preservation and that kind of thing. I volunteered with the Cleveland Metro Parks Watershed volunteer program. And there's an actual watershed center down in West Creek in Parma that has like just this extensive watershed preservation information. And that watershed group with the Metro Parks collaborates with all of the Metro Parks and do a lot of work at North Chagrin. I just did volunteer work down at South Chagrin. But my point is that they collaborate with ODNR, they collaborate with the stormwater, whatever, Cuyahoga County. All those groups are so linked in together. They all know each other. And the leadership in those groups are all in sync on all this programmatic kind of thing. So it really would be worthwhile to not try and reinvent or reconvene people without talking to the heads of some of those organizations. Especially with the Metro Parks being such a big landowner. I mean, they're constantly doing projects to preserve the rivers and the stormwater and everything that's going through the Metro Parks and doing invasive plant removal and all that stuff. So it's all intact. And as far as Holden has this big document for homeowners they can download that talks about how to preserve woodlands and waterways. And also Western Reserve has this extensive education program that anybody can participate in, anybody can watch their presentations, and they do this extensive education program every year. So I wouldn't overlook any of these organizations because I have learned so much and I would never have known it had these places not given these presentations, and Chagrin River Watershed Partnerships as well. But they're more, they're more linked in with the communities, but they take all this information from the other organizations as well. And it's pretty interesting. I think you do need to look at the Waterway Committee on here and probably expand it a little bit, in my opinion, because when you talk about soil erosion, planting trees is not going to be the only solution for that. And if soil erosion is a big problem, we need to spend some of the city's portion of that money to address that problem, whether it's on conservancy land or not. I mean, that's my opinion. I'm just saying that because it sounds like there's these silos that keep coming up every time I come to one of these meetings, and they have to be broken. I mean, to just always say, oh, we should do it this way, or we should spend the money this way, or these people. So I think everything's going in the right direction, but everybody's got to be in sync with that idea and ready to deal with it.
Thank you. Those are great thoughts. We do want to collaborate with everybody that's out there and every piece of information that we can not have to recreate. And
there's so much collaboration between those organizations and the leaders in those organizations for education, for actual project work, all that stuff.
if you could afterwards, just leave me your name and phone number or contact. I know some of these organizations, we've met with several of them. And, but there may be one or two that we don't know or don't have a contact, and you can,
Sure.
point us in the right direction. That'd be great. Thank you for your comments. Other comments? Yes, sir.
Eric Carlson, Gates Mills resident. Couple things. David, thanks for my name. I forget who mentioned it, but we've had some meetings and discussed some of this stuff before. One of the big things, I think, the idea of inventory. So I used to do inventory work with computer mapping for the Forest Service. And there's different levels you can do it at. You can do it at a large scale, or you can go tree by tree and what do we have where. So if you're planning on improving condition on a parcel by parcel basis, like, we can't ignore the fact that we've got the beach leaf disease, that we've got emerald ash borer is still around, and that the sugar maples aren't doing great. So if you've got a parcel that's 90% beech, you have to manage that completely differently than one that's regenerating on its own a bunch of Norway spruce, and it's going to be fine. And so I think that level of building up that inventory is worth putting, especially putting Gates Mills Land Conservancy members that can identify trees, at least, between a maple and a willow tree, like that kind of stuff is important and could be relatively low cost for a great value across all those properties to get and figure it out. And then layering it with, right, that's the benefit of those GIS layers, is layering it with the oil well, layering it with riparian setbacks. You can build all that in so that when you get to identifying where you want to spend money, you can prioritize based on, this is a high visibility prioritization. Like the village, all the villagers are going to see it because here it is, versus a high risk because it's super steep slopes. And if we cut all the beech trees off of it, what's going to happen in 2 years to it? So you can kind of prioritize based on different needs on individual parcels. So I think that should be a really high priority, like right off the get-go, because otherwise you don't know what you're talking about, like at those different places. Secondly, thinking about like big trees versus little trees, we all love the big ones, but they all start as little ones. And so like I look around the fields right here, like right across the river, and you see these huge 160-foot maples and oaks, and there's nothing else underneath them. And so unless you plant a tree there every 10 or 20 years, when those ones are gone, it's going to be like we're starting over from scratch. And I prefer to layer things. And so that when something falls, there's a 40-footer there waiting for them. And so, yeah, they got to hang out in the winds, but that's what they do in the forest. They wait for something to fall and then boom, it's already full. So not just thinking about, it's not one round of planting, it's planting under existing trees, knowing that they're going to fall in 5 years or in 25 years, but trees can hang out in the shade. Like they can sit there and they actually end up growing straighter and taller when they're hanging out in the shade. You can tell a tree if they've grown in an open field because their branches are all sideways, or if they've grown up in a mature forest and they're pencil straight, which is kind of neat. So I'm a teacher. I teach at university school. Don't discount teachers because guess what we have? The summer's off. And that's when a lot of this work can be done. So whether it's, university school, Gates Mills School, Hawkins School, like whoever it is, like we have 3 to 4 months during the summer and a lot of very able-bodied students that are willing to do work for some of the lower value stuff. The other thing that, the teardrop shape up, one of the things that to get people to value, like we have this room of people, council members up here that value it, but the way to get people to value it is to get them out in it. And it's one thing to drive by things, and we've got the metro parks and paths there, but like to have our own up there in the teardrop with just a nature path through there. The kid who wanted the bike path, if you don't want a paved bike path, put a dirt one in there. It's cheap, it's easy, gets kids on bikes, kids off the road. There's already existing facilities at Feller Field there, right? So you don't have to deal with parking. Really, it's just extra gravel from the grounds department, get it layered in there. I do it on my own property right across the street from Scott. So like my kids ride in my backyard. I would love for them to have a place to ride elsewhere as well. And then that gets at those younger kids that then value it as they get older. They want to participate in those projects. They want to do the trail work. They want to get out there and pull weeds so that it looks beautiful. And I want to stress that natural forest doesn't always look park-like. So like I'm rewilding my front yard somehow with the graces of my wife. And it doesn't look pretty when it starts. Like the trees are messy, they're short, the grass is growing up, but it's full of wildflowers and ferns and stuff. It just, if you give it a chance, it's there, but it takes a little bit. And so that's where signage comes in of like, I've thought about putting a sign up my front. I do own a lawnmower, but I'm choosing not to do it here so that I can rewild my front yard. And if a village project is happening where it looks messy and gross, that might be worthwhile to put a decent sign up that says, this is why we're doing this, so that people know. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Those are wonderful thoughts.
Can I just add one thing to it? We were all a bit concerned, I think, by the fact that the county told us all that the tree canopy had declined massively from 2011 to 2017. We have no idea what's happened since then. And with all the technology that's available, it's possible, I don't know how much it costs, but it's possible to have a tree canopy assessment done of whatever area you want to do. So the village, which is 9 square miles, would seem to me to be a manageable piece to say, can we do our own estimate? It wouldn't be necessarily apples and apples with what's come before. It would be a base point for us to measure our own progress against over the next 50 years. I won't be around for the final report, but you know what I mean.
That's a good thought. We can call Chris Ornane's office and ask him who did that report in 2017 and what it would take at least to update it for our area. Thank you, David.
I'm short. I just want to say, I'm so pleased that Eric is on the tree committee. What a breath of fresh air and what enthusiasm. We really have to harness that. To follow up on one of Barb's comments, another resource we should talk to is the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission, because they're the ones that put together the tree canopy assessment as well as its update. And I would encourage all of you to go to the county website and take a look at this urban tree canopy viewer. You can go parcel by parcel and see how much tree canopy your own parcel has lost between 2011 and 2017. And to Eric's point, we really do need to start with this data. And to David's point as well, we've lost 7 years between the last assessment and this current one. And we really need, I think it would be motivating for people to see how their tree canopy has moved. And typically it's declined since the first tree canopy assessment was done in 2011. But that's it. Thank you.
What's your name, please?
Sure.
Sharon Bodker. Sorry.
Thank you, Sharon.
Gates Mills resident.
Spouse.
Lives with me. Right? I live with her.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, audience, for participating. Do we have any other comments from council?
This is obviously a very complex matter. You've done a really good job of parceling it out, but obviously there's the other side, which is you have to do it kind of comprehensively. We certainly want to be diligent in, moving forward and having the right people on committees, but we also, need to move forward because, for example, our tree canopy committee met in January and it's now May. And if we're looking for some recommendations by September with regard to some of the parcels and how we might spend money, and we are going to go out to the pink sheet in June, to survey representatives from the village, this is potentially has a really slow launch, which I don't think that's what any of us want. So I guess I don't have an answer per se, but it's kind of like a timing issue. How do we maybe set a timeline for these?
So here's a
different
suggestion.
activities?
What if each of you has a sheet in front of you with some blank spots for names? If you have 1 or 2 or 3 or a few, send them in or drop them off at the office or email or text or something. And we'll take those and vet those, if you will. Also, flip back through the planning document that was published last summer. There's a lot of names in there of people that particularly may have had input on the tree canopy or the other environmental ordinances whose names we might not, I might not have known, knew that area. And we could again check it out with them, like what we did with Mitch Bass,
And, maybe a Gates Mills Connect, because that's, we can do that anytime. You don't have to wait for.
We can do that in a matter of a couple of days. That's right. It'd be nice a month from now to have that list filled out and have the names before council and say, here's our recommendations on the committee and subcommittee from the mayor, and council has to review those and confirm those. So can we try to do a soft target of 30 days? Okay.
I'd be for if we had a village-wide cut the vines day.
Or what?
Village-wide cut the vines day with some grapevines. I mean, even the what is it, wisteria or wisteria vines. I mean, you know, the grapevines are not, they're not native here. I mean, they were brought here because people were growing grapes and they're Concord grapes to sell them. Because on my parents' property, the posts and the wires were still there when they bought the property and they sold them to the Welch's plant in Concord. And you know, that when they stopped growing them, they just let them go. And now we've got vines everywhere, and, you know, the vines are hard on the trees, and when I do the inspections on some of the conservancy property, I'll bring a saw or my loppers and I'll just cut them. But Eric probably knows there's probably a better way to do that, to get rid of them. And you got to use the right stuff, because if you use the wrong poison on those, and, you know, it can get in the ground and beat up the trees. But if we gave everyone the right information on how to do it, you know, kind of like how we have the pick up the trash day, you know, we have a weekend every year where we go pick up the trash. If we had a cut the vines day, might be able to make at least a little bit of inroads there, and we.
It's all part of an education program.
Yep. And we'd have you know, yeah, cut this many vines, it helps the trees this way. And because I know on my property where I cut the vines, there's no tree canopy issue. I mean, every time I say, well, I got to get a little more light in here, and I'll take one down, and, you know, in the next year, you're like, I can't even tell I did anything. And so, but that's because I'm cutting the vines all the time. You know, there are no vines, and there's no vines, none of that other stuff. Tree is dead or diseased, it comes down, and
That's Scott's big thing. We should name it the Scott Broom Cut Down the Vines
Vine.
Day.
right.
I think the worst vine problem in the village is actually in the Metro Park property that's east of River Road and between Mayfield and Sherman,
Right,
or Mayfield and Wilson Mills.
right.
Mhm.
Maybe if we get the park to let us volunteer, we have a cut the vines day there too, right?
I'll show up.
But
It's a good suggestion, and there could be different things every month that we get the village involved in.
I went to a forestry conference 2 months ago, and I was yelled at because I was implying that native plants could not possibly be invasive, and that is not true. Our environment has changed in this part of the world, and some of the plants that we were familiar with are becoming invasive. And some of the ones that aren't native would add to our green space. So we've got to learn the lexicon of environmentalism, and it's not easy. That's all I'm pointing out. I'm not making it the same. There's a lot of subtle distinctions that need to be understood.
They had a good, the Land Conservancy had a good presentation on that last year, right? You were there. It was about invasive species.
Yeah, I
And
went.
it was up on Sherman Road.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
So they did have an education.
Yeah. We used to, well, I think it was maybe May or June, we did a presentation every week, and that was one of the topics. Yeah.
Presentations are good, but while we're talking, the invasion occurs.
Well, we had students up there too during the season that we were removing invasives. It's an ongoing process every year.
Yep.
And we've got
Die easy.
hundreds of acres. I mean, it's
You know, like
It's a big
poison ivy,
deal.
it's just rampant here right now.
Poison ivy's not a bad thing. That's.
Yeah.
Our family is so allergic to it. Yeah, our family's so allergic to it. We turn red in 2 seconds.
Now, if you want to talk about some other invasive species like garlic mustard or honeysuckle, or what's the one we're always struggling with?
Privet.
Multiflora rose.
multiflora rose with prickers.
Yeah, I mean, that stuff's all over the place.
Yeah.
And that really causes problems, but poison ivy doesn't cause problems in our natural environment. It causes problems to humans.
Let me say that I think we're probably at a wrap-up point here. We can't take a vote because that wasn't the purpose of the meeting, but I think we have a pretty good sense of each of your opinions. We'll get those documented and minutes out. It won't be ready for next week's meeting, but we'll have minutes out on this. Janet and I'll huddle tomorrow and adjust the document here, and then we'll put together a Gates Mills Connect document and get that out in the next couple of days as well. If you all would get me your suggestions, if any, that'd be helpful.
Yeah,
Craig?
just one last comment. I look at the priority list and the, top 7 from the advisory committee, which there was a lot of overlap between the town halls is, I think if we're serious about this and, I think we are is, the elephant in the room is where's the money come from for all of this? And I think at some point there ought to be some consideration to a line item in the budget. And I look at this and safety services, they've got a line item in the budget. Road infrastructure's got a line item in the budget. We're having discussions about broadband and internet. That's likely to be something in the budget. And I kind of look at protecting scenic views, preserve and protect tree canopy. And at the end of the day, I think if you had volunteer activities all year long, you'd probably have the same 15 or 20 people showing up to every event. And what all that looks like, I don't know. But I think at some point we've got to find a way to put something in the budget that would say at least a placeholder or a toehold that would say this is what we're looking to do for a specific point in time or for a specific year, just for consideration.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Oh, I'm sorry, sir.
Just real quick, 'cause I was sort of confused there.
Can we get the microphone?
Okay.
Thanks.
Bob Berthold, I'm a resident. I got a little confused there when we were talking, we started out with the tree canopy subcommittee, and then now we're at the end of the meeting, and it didn't really move into those other subcommittees, but that's fine. So I just have a couple comments sort of along with that. First, like Eric had mentioned about, getting teachers involved in this and that. Well, within our community, there is an environmental ed center linked with Mayfield, so right? So that has to be somebody we at least have to touch base with. I don't know what their mission statement really is, or what they actually do, but at least we need to touch base with them, right? And then also, as you move down into, I think that last subcommittee, the wildlife one, when you started to talk about the dark skies and blue skies and things like that. I mean, those are wonderful ideas. But yes, on all those different things, we need to first look at the ordinances that we have. And especially when you talk about lights and that kind of thing. Now, in the last, let's say 20 years, right? All the LED lights and all this, everything is a lot brighter and this and that, right? So lighting has changed and people are now all involved with, lighting up their houses, lighting up their yards, lighting up, 20 trees that they have in their yard. This is all something that's, new within, let's say the last 20 years or something like that, right? And we need to maybe address that first before we look at, dark skies, that kind of, which is great. I hope we get to that point. But just within our community, when we first moved in, before we, signed the contract for our house or whatever, I actually drove up the night before just to make sure, you know what? I don't want to live someplace that has streetlights. So I drove back up saying, I didn't know during the day when I was up there if there were streetlights or not. And I checked that out, So, those kinds of things we need to address first before we do the big picture or those real nice things about, dark skies or blue skies or whatever, So just see what those ordinances say. I mean, some people, their gate or their entrance to their property, now they have them all lit up with all kinds of colored lights and this and that. People have lights on their house that are flashing and doing things like that. So all those things need to be addressed. What is the ordinance? What can we actually do? So just those two comments.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay, may I have an ordinance? May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Thank you, David.
Second.
Thank you, Michael. Roll
Anton,
call.
Yes.
Broom, Deacon,
Yes.
Press, Steinbrink.
Yes.
Turner,
Yes.
Welsh.
Yes.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you all for attending. Thank you all to council for your great comments. This is a good start to let us get going. Thank you, audience, for joining us today.
100%.